joining us today. It looks like we have a good number of folks on the meeting, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm very, very excited to have Grace, Rebecca, and Beth with us today from Safe Voices. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you ladies to introduce yourselves and get started on today's webinar, because that's why we all are here. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Austin. I'm the Executive Director at Safe Voices, and Safe Voices is the Domestic Violence and Trafficking Resource Center that serves Androscoggin, Oxford, and Franklin County in Maine. So it's so nice to be here with all of you today. I'll let Grace introduce herself.
I'm Grace Kendall. I'm the Director of Development and Engagement for Safe Voices. I have been here for about 4 years now, and previously came from communications work in higher ed. And I forgot until just now that I used the picture of me with a wolf. So that was a very fun day. I was at a sanctuary here in Maine, and at the time they had this wolf who had been raised with humans, and so you could go in and have a moment with him. So that's Gandalf. And Beth, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Earle. I'm the Director of Programs here at Safe Voices. So I oversee all of our shelter and housing programs, as well as advocacy, intervention, and prevention services. And so get to do lots of fun things with our pets.
I guess I should also say that picture is of my dog, Baxter. He's a real sweetheart most of the time, a little spicy at other times, and a little touch and go in the office lately. I'm really excited to be here talking about this and talking about why we have pet-friendly shelters and how we got there. I know that the folks on this webinar today, a lot of you are domestic violence advocates. You're working at DV programs all across the country. And so I don't have to tell all of you that you already know that domestic violence is the leading cause of homelessness for women in our country, right? So we're interacting with and sheltering women who are experiencing housing instability, who are fleeing really dangerous situations. And the question or the issue of pets comes up a lot. You know, many survivors talk about the barrier to leaving a pet behind as one of the biggest reasons that they stay, or one of the reasons that they go back, because they're worried about their pet. They love their, fur babies are our family as well. And it's hard to think about walking away or not providing the same safety as you're trying to provide for yourself. So offering shelters that have the ability to take in pets is a really critical service for us. But how did we get there? How did we make that leap? It was something that I think happened really slowly over time. I've been in this work for 16 years, and I remember when I was an advocate, taking helpline calls, filling out shelter requests, and safety planning with survivors, that the issue of pets came up a lot. And I remember having conversations with survivors over and over again of saying, I know you don't want to leave your pet behind. I know that you love them and you care about them, and you're worried what's going to happen if you leave your pet behind to flee for safety. And then I would always follow it up with some form of, but you have to prioritize your safety. You have to prioritize your children's safety. And that had kind of been where we were stuck, because I think for a long time we weren't able to even understand the concept of oh, we could do this a different way. But like many domestic violence agencies, like many of the ones that you work at, we have this deep commitment to changing our practice over time, to evaluating what we're doing and to do it really well, and to say, how do we do this that is responsive to survivors? How are we listening to their feedback and adapting and changing, even when things feel a little scary or they feel like the unknown, or we can't think about the concept of how to even do this? But that's really where it started. It started with us saying, this is something that we hear all the time. And as somebody who has pets, and I've had pets my entire life, the idea of saying I'm going to leave my pet behind to go seek safety for myself doesn't even seem like something that I could do. But it was something that we were asking our survivors to do. And so as we've updated and changed and made our sheltering practice and all of our practices better over time, this became one of those things where we started saying, like, we don't have to start with no for sheltering pets. Like, what if we said, like, maybe there is a path to do this? Maybe we can do this. And how do we eliminate those barriers for survivors? How do we help keep pets safe along with side of our survivors? And how do we do that in a way that sets us up for success, sets them up for success, and checks all the boxes that we need to check, right? You've got to have your policies, and you've got to think through, what do you do when this scenario happens? And you have to be willing to kind of be in that discomfort of the growth of a new program. And so that was kind of the journey that we took. It wasn't even a concept until all of a sudden it was. And then we said, oh, we can do this. We've got a lot of work to do to make it happen. We've got work to do in our physical buildings. We've got work to do in our practice and how flexible thinking we have. But that was kind of the journey that we took. And I know Beth, our director of programs, is going to talk a little bit about some of those things, some of the pieces that we learned along the way, and some of the things that if you're all thinking about welcoming pets into your shelters or thinking through what could that look like, how would you do it, what type of parameters would there be, she's going to get into some of that. And so I'm going to pass it over to Beth to talk a little bit about some of those pieces.
Thanks, Rebecca. So as Rebecca mentioned, we serve 3 counties here in Maine, and they're 3 pretty large counties, pretty rural as well. We have 3 shelters spread out throughout those counties. And each year, we shelter about 100 survivors between those 3 shelters. They're all pet friendly, and 2 of our shelters are for families and 1 is for individuals. And out of those 100 survivors, that includes children as well. And so it's about, I'd say 60 to 75, 80-ish of adults that we take in each year. And then the rest are made up of children. And so out of that group, about 10 to 20 of them on average every year decide to bring their pets with them into our shelter. And, sometimes we always will have a conversation with folks ahead of time to talk about their pets and what would be the best situation for them, because, coming into a shelter, a large space, there are, as Rebecca said, we do have a lot of policies and procedures around pets. And having to take care of them, keep them in your room, which could be a small space. And so sometimes, folks are able to have their pet stay with a family member or a friend, or choose another option. And then there's other times when, they just decide it's not a safe place for their animal to be. Maybe they have a large dog and the only room we have is pretty small, and they're working, and, they don't want to keep their dog in the room all day long. And so we are able to work with our local animal shelters for fostering pets in those situations. And so we're really lucky to have some good relationships there. And so far, I'm going to defer maybe to Rebecca or Grace on this one. I think we've been pet friendly for 5-ish years now. I lose track of time. So I think that's it. And at this point, we've had many cats, many cats, a good number of dogs. We've had a couple of guinea pigs. We have avoided a snake. There's a lot of staff that are a little, worried about what would happen, but we would definitely take a snake. And we really are set up to take most small domestic animals. And then we actually have some great partnerships and relationships with some other folks who can take larger animals, or we would try to work with survivors in those situations. And so in thinking about, again, after we have those conversations with survivors around their pets and what is the best next step for them, if they're thinking about bringing them into shelter, we always talk about, our space. Like I said, we have, bedrooms can vary in size, what floor the bedroom is on. And so we really are able to share all that information with survivors to make sure that situation is safe, appropriate, and conducive for their animal to come in. We have a lot of conversations around caring for pets. As Rebecca said, we created lots of policies and procedures around folks being able to bring their pets in. We've edited those policies and procedures. And, I'll talk about, the unexpected here and how we continue to, evolve and edit and grow, what we should be preparing folks for, what we should be expecting, and how we can best support survivors. But we do have some pretty strict policies around survivors caring for their pets. We have expectations around how long a pet could be at the shelter alone. So, like if someone is working or going to school or out in the community a lot, we have expectations that they are able to come back within so many hours to care for their pets. We do have, if someone has a cat, for example, then they keep the litter box in their room with them. And then the expectation to keep that clean. And then, of course, being able to feed, maintain, all of that kind of stuff are things that we can support survivors with, but also have an expectation that they have a plan for how they're going to care for their pet during that time. We talk a lot about behaviors of animals, right? And so we'll have a conversation around, is your animal, so again, I think I kind of mentioned this, like animals stay in their rooms or they can be on leash, but they can't, just free roam throughout the shelter because everyone else in the space might have different experiences with animals. Maybe they have allergies, maybe they are fearful. So we do ask that folks keep them with them. And then if, there is any behaviors that come up for an animal, maybe it's someone knows that their dog barks a lot or their cat might hiss. Or those kind of things, then we have conversations again, really individualized with each person around what we can do to support them, how we can make sure that they can keep their pet and their animal with them, but keep everyone else safe as well. Damages can happen when you have, pets, when you have kids, that happens as well. But we do talk about, again, those expectations of survivors keeping their animals, with them or in safe locations. And so, we would ask someone to talk to us immediately if maybe there was some damage that happened in a room. We really try to promote that transparency so that we can work with the person. We can make sure we can clean up anything or get things fixed. But it is something to think about that, you just never know what's going to happen and have contingency plans for that. And then I think, there's always those unexpected. I think one of the best stories that we can share is several years ago, we had a survivor come in with their cat. And shortly into that situation, the cat had, I think it was 6 kittens. And so we went from having one cat with this particular family to, a family of 7 cats that we then had to work with that survivor on. How we're going to put those cats up for adoption, taking care of those kittens, all of those kind of things. And so you just never know what to expect. I think, other things to think about. And again, these are where we've kind of shifted our policies. So we didn't used to be explicit around if someone was fleeing and they had their pet, they of course came into shelter and we had all those conversations. But then we started to have survivors just bring in new pets into our shelter. And so we kind of changed our policy to say that, if you're fleeing with your pet, then that's definitely something we can work with you on and take into shelter. But if you are looking to obtain a new animal, that might be a good goal to have when you're safely housed into your new apartment or house. And so that's something else we've had to think about. And then, it's just, I don't think I have to say this, but I'll say it anyway. Pets are family. They can make the shelter feel more like home. I think they can really help to bridge, survivors. It's scary, right? Like you have just fled from, a situation, you're moving into this unknown. And so to be able to have that animal or to be able to come in, maybe you're just coming to shelter and you didn't bring a pet, but you love cats or you love dogs. And so to be able to have that community there, and it can really help to help people feel a little bit more relaxed. And then, another thing is it's just a good point of contact, right? So for our advocates who are working in our shelter, when they're trying to build that rapport and connect with a survivor. If they have an animal, it can be a kind of a good starting point. Just like, hey, how's it going? How's your animal settling in? And then that can naturally navigate to talking about their own situation. And so, we do love it, and it's been going really well. And we just, we are very fluid, and we are very open and transparent. But really, the positive aspects outweigh any of the negatives that have happened for us so far. Um, so that being said, it has been this great experience, as we talked about, with having pet friendly shelters. But it's also just been a great experience for our Safe Voices in general and our community. And so I'll hand it over to Grace to talk a little bit more about that.
Grace, we can't hear you.
Is that any better?
Yes, you're
Okay.
back.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Grace. I'm the Director of Development and Engagement at Safe Voices. So I'm sort of 50% fundraising, 50% media and community relations. So what I wanted to talk about are all the things that pet-friendly sheltering can affect outside of the shelter, because it really can transform huge parts of your whole agency if you kind of get comfortable with saying yes to more things. um, so the first one, and maybe the most obvious one, is with your media relations. So storytelling is all about the universal. And so think of when you're getting into like a new book or a new movie, that hook. It's not necessarily that you have experienced the exact crazy thing. Like, nobody has pulled a John Wick, hopefully, and gone after all of the people who hurt your dog. But almost everyone has experienced how much a dog can love you and how painful it can be to lose them. And so that story becomes very universal, even though the specifics of it perhaps are not. So pets are a very nice and sort of connectable in for the general public who may not do this work every day, who may not be a survivor with experience in domestic abuse or trafficking, but might have a pet that they love very dearly. And so this subject that might have made them a little uncomfortable and a little squirrely becomes all of a sudden much more accessible when they can talk about it from, okay, well, did you know that dogs and cats and pets are also affected by domestic violence? It's not just the human that's a part of it. And rightly or wrongly, the animals connect with people. I know we all want people to just believe us when we say that survivors matter and survivors need to be trusted, and we believe survivors. But for some folks, it's a little harder to get there. And talking about animals first is a nice in. It's also another angle to talk about power and control, which is this very nuanced, complicated subject that we all are so used to talking about, but the general public is not. But when you can talk to them about how power and control can also be used against animals, or animals can be used as a tool of power and control, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more connectable and a lot easier to understand. So what I like to do is take these universal stories, these sort of hooks, and I really focus on our local earned media. So for anyone who's not a communications person, earned media is a news story that you pitch to your local newspaper or your local news TV news station. So all of your PR, all of your press releases, those are technically earned media, but the goal is that you send them a press release and then also say, like, we have these people available to do interviews. We have photos that you can run. And then the story becomes much bigger than just your press release. It becomes a full in-depth news story. So for local earned media, some of the places I like to focus my energy are sort of your local papers, but also your state like paper of record. So in Maine, we have in our area the Lewiston Sun Journal, which is sort of a regional paper, but we also have the Portland Press Herald, which even though it's far south of us, it's actually the statewide paper of record. And so we might try to place things in the Portland Press Herald if the story is big enough. There are also your local news organizations, but even your local community partners, and they have their newsletters that they send out to their constituents. I think even those are good places. If you have a cool partnership with your animal shelter, getting that talked about in their newsletter is a great way to get new people following your organization as well. And then one of the less obvious places is once you start doing pet-friendly sheltering, you can also start going after some of the really niche news organizations. So, like Cats Monthly. That's a weird little magazine, right? But their readership is very passionate. And if you can get a story placed there about how your shelter is pet friendly and what that means for a cat owner who's entering shelter and how they didn't have to leave that animal behind, you can actually get some very, very good coverage that's far beyond just regional. And I can talk a little bit more about examples of that in the next couple of pages. So for your local papers and your local news, TV news organizations, I like to actually pitch them stories, not just send them a press release that they will run verbatim. I like to pitch, like with the who, what, when, where, and why actually laid out for them and tell them like what the actual hook is. So the kinds of stories regarding pet friendly sheltering that really work for those news organizations are human interest stories. They are about hope and positive change and nonprofits adapting to like new realities and nonprofits being sort of on the cutting edge of solving problems that most people didn't know existed. So what you see on the screen are two examples of local newspapers that covered our pet-friendly sheltering processes in some way. The one on the left, domestic abuse shelters are going to the dogs and saving more lives, was just a very simple pitch. It was maybe I sent him one page, a bulleted list, and he came back and wrote the most in-depth, thoughtful story that we still use today, that I still trot out to talk to new donors. And yet we got so much mileage out of it. And I have a really great relationship with that reporter because he also got a lot of mileage out of that piece. And yeah, the thing at the bottom, remember to pitch. Do not wait for them to come to you. They're not going to. Or if they do, it's going to be about the issue you don't want to talk about. I am a huge fan of really actively pitching your local media and approaching them with a very cool story and making the case for why they should publish it and how you can help them get it done. So I go to them with a full pitch with all the who, what, when, where, why. I tell them who we have available at our agency who's willing to be interviewed on camera. I try to also find a survivor who's willing to be on camera. That goes a really long way with reporters. But we also are very careful about protecting our survivors. And if a reporter asks to interview a survivor, we actually just had this come up last week. If it's without 24 hours notice, my answer is pretty much a blanket no, because I want survivors to have that time to really think about the request. And so that is something that I feel comfortable doing because most of the reporters I work with, I have educated them a lot about how I will help them and also how they can expect to work with us. So the niche earned media, which is like the odd little, like, if you had told 12-year-old me that my future job would have an article in the Chronicle of the Horse, I would have peed myself out of happiness. Like, I was the biggest horse girl. And why would you ever think that domestic violence work is going to overlap with the Chronicle of the Horse? But what happened was a horse rescue approached us and said, do you ever have people who try to leave and are worried about what to do with a large animal, with their horse? And the answer was obviously yes, but we had no idea how many because it was such a hard stop for us. Like, we had no way of helping somebody like bring a horse with them when they were fleeing, that the conversation never got far enough that we started tracking the numbers. But we said yes. And we also said yes to helping them write a grant to Red Rover where they are going to build a new barn And out of 8 stalls, 4 of them are going to be prioritized to foster horses for survivors of domestic violence who are looking to flee their relationship. And that whole project, like our involvement in it happened because we were pet friendly and we had been vocal about being pet friendly. So this horse rescue knew that we already did this. They knew that we had a relationship with Red Rover. They knew that we had been out in the media sort of like being issue leaders about the idea of pet friendly sheltering. And so they approached us and said, would you be willing to do an MOU with us? And we got really, really great coverage out of it. Another partnership was with the Gasky Cat Foundation. So you can also find these charitable givers, foundations that are animal focused, but that want to talk about and fund issues related to pet safety or the human animal bond. And that's been really good for us too. So the other half of my job is fundraising. I have seen positive effects from pet friendly sheltering in grant writing, partnerships that we can co-write grants with other organizations. So that's the horse rescue that we were just talking about, as well as with my conversations with donors. So when you're grant writing, your net automatically widens. All of a sudden, if there's this foundation over here that funds animal causes, environmental causes, and arts, and you previously did not qualify for any of those things, all of a sudden you can write to them and say that you actually have an animal cause that they can fund. And that does two things. It opens up a line of funding that you didn't have before, but it also makes a new funder aware of domestic violence work. And Rebecca is having a meeting with a funder, actually, I think next week, who previously we have never qualified for any of their grant programs. They're focused on environment and the arts. And they are now looking to expand into grants related to homelessness. And so they're going to meet with us and talk about what that work looks like for domestic violence. And these kinds of things wouldn't have happened if we didn't have if we hadn't tried. Like I met with this foundation 8 months ago. We didn't qualify for the grant. I chatted with them a long time. I don't have any idea if it's related, but I'm sure it didn't hurt that I was able to talk with them about some of the other work that we do. So you also might see the grants that they're open to, you might see that widen up in the future as well. Partnerships, this is really about joint grant writing. If you can say write a grant with your local humane society and say it's half advocacy and half foster support, so that animals coming into shelter with their owner also have medical care, then funders love joint grant applications. I wish they didn't because it's so much more work. But when the partnerships work, they're really, really fun. They can also be really fun. And so it's just another positive. I see Katie's reaction. Yeah, there's so much work, but they're almost always good. And then donors, again, it goes back to that universal storytelling. If a donor doesn't have lived experience with domestic violence, which I'll say is rare. Most people have some connection to DV somewhere in their past. But if they don't, this is one really easy beginning conversation to have with them. Like, did you know that we have pet friendly shelters? And all of a sudden they're like, why would you even need that? And then you can talk about all of the other things. So it's this very nice, easy domino effect of you get them talking about cute animals and wanting to protect animals, which is easy. And then you can talk about all the other things, which are a little bit harder and require them to have a little bit more emotional resiliency. Sorry, guys, I feel like I'm talking a ton, but that's kind of how we designed the presentation, was that it was about the non-shelter stuff. Like shelter is a thing, but this is about all the stuff beyond it. So one of the other things that could happen when you start to say yes to pet-friendly sheltering, and then also maybe say yes to some other things that come from that, is that you start to have these very cool community partnerships and you see your impact become broader and your voice become a little bit louder. So the pictures you see here, Olive Pit Brewing is a local microbrewery in Lisbon, Maine. And in a couple weeks, we're going to actually go hang out with them because they are having a brew launch for a Safe Voices Maple Amber. So this can is, this label that you see right here is what every can is going to look like. And they were attracted to us because of our pet-friendly sheltering. Olive Pit Brewing is actually named after their pit bull, who's named Olive. And so when they learned that we were pet friendly, they wanted to learn more about it. And then as we sat down and chatted with the owners, they were like, well, let's do a whole special brew with like a custom can label, and our helpline is on this can. Information about pet friendly sheltering is on this can, and a link to our website and our Venmo to donate are on this can. And that wouldn't have happened without it being about pet friendly sheltering to start. But then, of course, as I'm meeting with her, pet friendly sheltering was the in, but then she is so engaged in the broader mission now. It's not just because we do pets, like she is all about it. And that was so powerful. And then your voice being louder is really about how if you're the first one in your area or your state to become pet friendly, which is how our experience was, we were the first shelter in the state of Maine to be pet friendly, you're kind of automatically going to be a leader in that space and a resource for other organizations that are considering it. And I would really encourage you to say yes to those asks when they come in. If somebody wants to like have a chat about what it looks like, how you did it, being that resource for people is both the right thing to do, but also it's really, really great coalition building. All of a sudden, people from sister organizations are going to be talking about you to their funders because they'll have this wonderful experience of you supporting them and trying a new thing. So it's really in my mind, it's about like a abundance mindset that saying yes to them is going to pay off down the road. And then I am going to turn it over to Rebecca for this very fun slide about how this also expanded into some of our work policies.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. I think Grace did such a great job, explaining how it's so much more than just developing a policy and figuring out how to do the logistics. And like I said at the beginning, we were, like many shelters, always stuck in that place of no, like this isn't even possible. But when we shifted that mindset and started saying like, well, why isn't it possible? How could we do this? What does that look like? And starting from the place of saying we want to do this, then the other pieces really do fall into place. And, like Beth had mentioned, there's a lot of tweaks and adjustments that happen along the way, There were a lot of times when we jokingly are sitting there going, whose idea was this anyway, to take pets into the shelter? Like that's, I don't want it to sound like all sunshine and roses if you're thinking about doing this. There are many moments when we've said that. But it was always, from this place of like a relief valve of saying, you know what, we're doing it because at the end of the day, we want our services to be reflective of what we actually want for survivors, which is for them to be treated like a whole person, for them to be valued and loved and cared about. And part of that is having the ability to have their pets with them. And so it's how we approach all of our sheltering work and all of our advocacy work of saying, survivors deserve to have the best. And if that's what we're trying to do and that's what we're committed to doing, then we're going to figure out the details along the way. So the other thing that we do is we're also a pet-friendly office. And so being a pet-friendly office kind of started before we were a pet-friendly shelter. We had a couple folks who were bringing in, who had dogs, and we had a couple like office dogs. And then once like one person was like, oh, I can bring a dog in, then we started, more people wanted to bring dogs in. And so then that kind of just expanded, and we said like, okay, let's put a little thinking power behind this. Let's pump the brakes. Let's come up with what's the parameters? Is it all animals? Is it some animals? Is it all the time? Like, we've got to give some direction and guidance to our staff, just like we have to with our survivors in our shelters. We have to give some kind of guidance and direction for how to do this and how to do it well. And so we did that. We came up with a policy that talked about, the behavior of the pet in the office, which ironically is why my dog is not in the office very often. He's naughty. Like, he was such a sweet boy. And then I don't know what happened to his brain when he turned 2, but now he's like super possessive of me and doesn't want anyone near me. I can't have that in the office. Like, that's not the right vibe. So we're working on it slowly. But so, what's your pet going to be like in the office? Talking about vaccines, talking about having your pet spayed or neutered if they're in the office. What does all of that look like? What are the expectations to clean up after your pet? All of those things that you kind of start to think through. And so this is a collection of pictures of some of our office pets. Now, you'll notice most of them are dogs, but not all of them. We have had a goat come by the office to hang out. It wasn't like an office goat. It didn't hang out often, but it was here. We did have a hedgehog. That was Winston. And Winston lived here for a very long time. And then we have Grace has foster puppies that are in all the time. We have naughty dogs that come in with me and some of the other staff members. But most of our dogs, they're really sweet, and it's so fun to see them together. And, on the days when it's really hard, and this work is really hard, sometimes you just need to sit on the floor and snuggle a puppy because you're worried about all of the things. You're worried about your survivor. You're worried about all of the other stuff that's going on in the world that affects our work. And having that ability to just sit down and cuddle a foster puppy or hang out with, one of the office dogs can be really helpful. We try and have really good boundaries around where the pets are in the office so that survivors coming in get to opt in to an interaction with a pet or opt out of that interaction. So most of the dogs, when they're just hanging out, they're hanging out in our non-advocacy spaces. And that if a survivor wants to interact with the dog, then that's an invitation that's available to them. Because, we have to be careful of that, and we have to think through what those things look like. But being a pet-friendly office, I think, greatly increases the feelings in the office and the morale. And I mean, just look at those faces. Look at those dogs. They're so cute. And so we've also had therapy pets as part of our staff. And so it's just something that feels like such a gift that we can give our staff to be able to bring their animals in, be a responsive workplace to, the needs and the dynamics of having pets, and just get to hang out with dogs. I'm still trying to figure out how we can have an office cat. We had a bit of a mouse problem earlier. And my solution was, we don't need a pest guy, we need an office cat. But we quickly pumped the brakes on that, thinking through long weekends. So I think that is kind of the end of our official presentation, but we did leave time for folks to ask questions. So I'll hand it back over to Danielle if she wants to open up some of that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. That was a fantastic and beautiful presentation. So yes, everyone, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat and we will read them out. Or please feel free, again, to use your hand raise function that we talked about at the top of the hour. That is under the React button at the bottom of your screen, that button with the heart on it that says React. Go ahead and click on that and you will see the button that is second from the bottom, says raise hand. So if you'd like to ask a question live, just hit that hand raise button and we'll make sure to unmute your mic. Otherwise, please feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat. But in the meantime, I know we do have a couple questions that came through on my end. Let's see. First one from Roshni Bernadette. They ask, could you recommend New York or New Jersey based pet magazines or publications that I could reach out to?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know them off the top of my head. But I am definitely happy to do some research.
That's great. Thank you, Grace. Question from Linda. Is there a list available of pet-friendly shelters and the horse shelter that you guys mentioned earlier?
You know, I don't think there's a central location where that information is held. If there is one, it's not one that I'm aware of. I think because so many shelters don't currently offer sheltering for pets. But it would be great if there was.
There is a website, I don't remember the title of it, but there is a website that purports to have all of the pet friendly shelters in the US, and you can click on your state. I have found that it's not super accurate, but it's a good starting point. Um, if you Google pet friendly domestic violence shelters, United States, you should come up that website should be one of the first results. The horse rescue that we work with is the Maine State Society for the Protection of Animals. So it started way back when as a broader organization, which is why it doesn't have a horse specific name. But as years went on and other rescues popped up, they got into like really their niche area is horses. And so they are, I believe they're in Wyndham. It's about 40 minutes away from us. Yeah, and I got to go tour, and they have like 6 Frisians right now from a seizure in Vermont, and they are, now that they've been at the rescue for a while and they're healthy again and they've put weight on, they are just the most gorgeous animals.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. And yes, thank you, Tia, for dropping those links in the chat. So Safe Havens for Pets is operated by AWI, the Animal Welfare Institute. That is a list of programs that essentially provide services for pets experiencing domestic violence and recently pets experiencing homelessness with their person. So while that is not necessarily a list of pet-friendly shelters, there are pet-friendly shelters included, as well as animal welfare organizations that provide temporary foster care or temporary boarding for pets experiencing domestic violence or houselessness. So that is a great resource. And then domesticshelters.org is another great online resource. They sort of operate a list of, all shelters. You can enter your zip code or your city and find a list of domestic violence shelters near you. They are not necessarily all pet friendly, but they do a fairly good job of updating each entry to reflect whether or not that shelter has what they call pet options. And then you can click on each entry to find out if those pet options mean that the shelter allows pets on site in shelter, or if they have some sort of off-site boarding or fostering program, maybe in partnership with a humane society or a boarding facility. But yes, like Grace and Rebecca said, those listings, are updating all of the time, changing all of the time. So it's always good to do a little bit more research, before you depend on a shelter listed there to be pet friendly.
That comment, Danielle, reminds me of one other really, really positive thing that happened in one of our community partnerships. So the foster program that we had with our local humane society, because it went so well with the Safe Voices partnership, they just this past year actually expanded it. And now they have a program called the Safekeeping Foster Program, where they will foster up to, in 30-day increments, up to 90 days for folks who are experiencing homelessness, for folks who have to visit rehab, or for National Guard folks who have to go on sort of not obviously like a long tour, like an 18-month tour, but some of those shorter stints that they have to do out of state will also foster for them as well. And that really was born out of the experience that we had between Safe Voices and that Humane Society.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Grace. That's fantastic. Another question from Patty. Patty is curious what your maximum number of animals per family is that is allowed at your DV shelter. Currently, it sounds like Patty's shelter is only allowing 1 animal per family, but she has been advocating to increase that number. Do you guys have a set number of a maximum number of pets that a person or a family can bring in?
We do not. And I think this would be where, it'd be very individualized and asking a lot of questions around what the pets were, what the upkeep is, thinking about what our space is. As I mentioned, we have 3 different shelters, and in each of those shelters, room sizes can vary. The size of the shelter and the outdoor space varies in all those spaces. And so I think, our goal would be to shelter all of the pets that someone is trying to bring. But I do imagine that if someone had a lot of animals, that we might have to have a conversation around safety, and numbers and what that looks like. And then that's when we would, I think there's another question in the chat too around, partnerships, but that's when we would talk about our partnerships with our local Humane Society around, providing foster homes. And we also have a great relationship with them around, because sometimes survivors do choose to just relinquish their pets for a variety of reasons. And so that's another partnership we have with our local Humane Society. And for the most part, sometimes they're at capacity and they have a lot going on and they're short staffed, but for the most part, our MOU is around for them to prioritize those pets and those animals for us.
Safe to
Yeah,
say
I think
the 7 cats was our highest number for one survivor, I think. Is that safe?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think in the same way that we have ongoing conversations when we're taking new requests for shelter space and we're looking at the size of the family, we're saying, how do we make this work? Do we have a room big enough? Do we have the right staffing levels, not just for the number of people, but the specific concerns or issues that maybe are being raised up or elevated? And so, I think when we were developing our policies, we tried to be less black and white in those types of ways of like how many pets, and more black and white in like what is expected of the behavior of the pets who are here and the responsibility of the people caring for them. Because somebody could have 3 dogs and be caring for them very, very well with no issues. And so what is 1 versus 3? I think, but it is an ongoing capacity question, right? Just in the same way that we have those ongoing capacity questions about, when we're opening up beds or when we're turning over rooms and saying we can take in another family. It's like, let's be realistic about what number of people we can put in this space and have a good, cohesive, happy house. And so for all of you who are running shelters, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because in shelters, there's no such thing as a small issue. They're all big issues, and it's congregate living, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. And so we want the pets to feel like a net positive and not a conflict point.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all. Question from Linda. Linda, I might ask you if you feel comfortable to unmute and give us a little more information on your question here. Looks like your question is whether or not our presenters have any recommendations on how to put this information into your work policy. Linda, do you feel comfortable just adding a little bit more to that question? Is your shelter currently pet friendly? Currently not?
Yes. Whoops.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda. We can hear you.
Okay. So I don't work for a shelter. I work for the Department of Corrections in Massachusetts. I'm the domestic violence coordinator. So I support employees of domestic violence, and I have a policy. And in that policy, there's an addendum that has shelters. And I just added information for military people. I would love to add the animal piece, but it needs to be something that's kind of like concrete. And I don't know if it's concrete yet, enough to put in the policy.
Are you looking for information about what your local shelters
Well,
do,
that's
or
why
a policy, or an internal policy?
Um, for shelters. Like if a victim was to look at my policy, they would say they could see, oh, there's a animal shelter that I could go to. So they would be more apt to go to the shelter if they could take their animal.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out like how can I put it in my policy? Do I put those 3 links that you um put in the chat?
I think that could be a good place to start, Linda. It sounds, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it sounds like your policy also serves as a bit of a resource for survivors. So it's meant to
Yes.
be like, here are your rights, and here are some resources to help you navigate this. I mean,
Yes.
honestly, I think the first thing that I'd encourage you to do is if you know who your local domestic violence resource centers are, call them up and ask if they shelter pets. And if they do, then you can concretely put, this shelter offers pets, offers sheltering for pets as well. I think the links are, could be really helpful, or even just acknowledging as part of those resources that you're trying to provide that, oftentimes survivors are concerned or worried about their pets and worried that they can't take their pets with them. If this is something you're worried about, here's the number to your local domestic violence hotline. Talk with them about it. Talk with them about what options and resources and safety planning can look like, right? Because safety planning can be a pretty broad bucket. For us, it looks like taking pets into our shelter. It also looks like working with the Humane Society and the horse rescue. But for other DV shelters, it looks like having volunteers who are fostering pets. That's not something we've done before, but I know that is a practice that some places do. And so I think it's highly individualized. And so if you're looking for real specific resources for your area, call your local DV project. They'd be happy to take that call and talk with you about what their individual practice looks like to help kind of flush that out for you.
Okay, that sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. That was a great question. Oh, I saw your hand up, Melanie, and now it popped away. If you'd like to ask a question live, please feel free to pop your hand back up. But if you need to hop off, that's totally fine too. I know we do have some additional questions in the chat. There's Melanie. All right, we'll go ahead and hop over to you, Melanie.
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
I just am curious because I'm actually a DV survivor myself and I work at a shelter. And I know a lot of our crisis calls that we receive are a lot of victims that have pets. And like I mentioned in the chat, a lot of them won't and will not leave their homes if they have to leave their pets behind. I have mentioned this program to my director numerous times, and I really don't know what else to do to help these victims, because I know how that is, and I know that's in a tight spot, and they're risking lives to stay at home in a situation just so their pet is protected. We recently had a client. I don't know what we did with her pet. She had a pit bull, but he was actually trying to defend her while she was getting abused. And then the abuser started beating on the dog, and somehow we got her dog boarded for a couple of days. But after that couple of days, she ended up leaving the shelter because we couldn't, I guess, fund for the dog to stay at the shelter or that place for more days. So really, I just am trying to find some type of way to help those type of victims that, or just bring some type of ideas to my director that will make her want to, make us make a change or at least work on it.
Yeah,
I have thoughts.
that can
I'm
be really
guessing.
hard. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Grace, jump in.
I don't know if you want me to jump in first. I would be curious about what your director's primary sticking point is. Like, what is she most worried about? Because if it's money, there are grants out there that you can write that will help you convert a shelter into being pet friendly. Red Rover, the convener of this Lunch and Learn, is like one of the places you can go write a grant for this. If it's education for staff, Red Rover also provides really great education in the form of their Don't Forget the Pets trainings. So I'm curious if you know what is the thing that is making her not want to do it.
Yeah. And I can piggyback onto that, right? So when I'm wearing my executive director hat, not my, Mom of Baxter hat, it's worrisome, right? We're talking the things that you could start worrying about. Is a dog going to bite a child in the shelter? What happens? What are we going to do? What if there are damages to the building? I think that you just put that in there, damages and allergies. Those are all concerns that we had. I believe that they're all things that you can work through. Like Beth had mentioned, the pets don't just have the ability to free roam throughout the building. So the owner has to be in control of that dog, has to have that dog on a leash. We have to, anytime there's behavioral issues, we're talking about it, we're addressing it early on, as a way to mitigate that risk. Allergies is one that, we're fortunate that we have 3 shelters. And so we have some flexibility. If we have somebody who has a very severe pet allergy, it's one of the things that we talk about. And then we're thinking to ourselves, okay, where do we have pets in our 3 buildings? Can we or do we need to move people around to be able to accommodate this? How severe of an allergy is it? Because, we can move people into a building that doesn't have pets, but if it had pets last week, what does that look like? So these are all things that we definitely thought through and worked through. But the other thing is, we're happy to talk with folks about what it looks like. And shelters that are doing this, I don't want to speak for all of them, but I think most of us are really happy to talk about how you can work through those things, and what that looks like.
Thank you all so much. Melanie, was there anything else that you wanted to add or any other follow-up questions that we had before we move on to maybe one final question before we close out today? Okay, awesome. So with that, yeah, we will, if you all have time, we'll do one last question. I know we're not going to be able to get to everyone today, but if you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Danielle at redrover.org, or any of our presenters who have their emails listed here on this final slide. And thank you all so much who were able to join us today. Let's see. Last question. Uh, Let's go ahead and ask one of the couple of questions that was sent to me in a private message, because this question comes up a lot, and we'd love to hear what you ladies have to share about it. The question was, how do you deal with pets causing damage to shelter spaces, chewing, potty accidents, etc.? How much do we need to budget to replace damaged items?
That's a good question. I don't think we put any specific budget considerations in, for replacing of damaged items. It's not something that has felt unmanageable, to be honest. I think we knew, like everyone knows, that having pets means you're going to have stuff happen, right? You're going to have accidents. I honestly think that we've probably had to do more at our admin building with our staff dogs, and getting the carpets cleaned after some potty accidents than we have at our shelters, to be honest.
Well, that's because y'all let me bring in foster puppies and they're 8 weeks old.
I'm wondering, Beth, if you have any, being in the program and a little bit closer to the day-to-day, we are managing difficult pet behavior. If you have thoughts about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to say. I mean, we don't have a line in the budget for pet damages, and so I think we've been pretty fortunate in having limited numbers, and I really do think that's a couple of factors that play into that. I think one is that we really do lay out the expectations, and staff are really, we're lucky we have staffing in our shelters the majority of the day, and not 24 hours, but a lot of them. And so being able to have conversations in those moments, if they're seeing an animal with a behavior that's looking like it's going to cause a damage or not. So I think that's one of the things. And then I think the other thing is that survivors are just so grateful and fortunate to be able to bring their pets with them. That they do what they need to do, and they take care of their pets and they take care of their animals, and they're upfront and honest. and coming into shelter is very hard for adults and children and animals, right? It's a different environment, it's different. But I think that, I think we all just do a great job of supporting, and then also, having lots of distractions. So like, lick mats or toys or bones, and those kind of things for distractions. But really, I, knock on wood that we haven't had any major issues. We'll figure it out if we do. But I think it's a testament to the survivors, bringing in their pets and really taking care of them.
I think part of it too is that the work was put in ahead of time to create policies before pets were brought to shelter. And I think that also goes to speaking to some of the concerns of Melanie's director, that maybe developing the policies before you even fully decide if you're going to be pet friendly, maybe developing the policies will help alleviate some of that director's concerns, because you can just answer the questions before there's any risk involved. Like, okay, what happens if a dog chews on furniture? Well, the dog might not have ever chewed on furniture if you had a policy that said when they're not in their owner's room that they have to be on a leash. And same for what happens if, a dog bites a child. It's kind of the same thing. If you already have that policy of any dog who's not in their closed room has to be on a leash, then it's kind of answers the problem before it happens. And I think we did a really good job. It was before I was here, so I can't take credit for it, but I think we did a really good job in having those policies created ahead of time.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. This was such a wonderful presentation. Lots of thank yous that I'm seeing in the chat. So I know it was valuable for a lot of folks. Just one last shout out. I know it was mentioned once, but for any of you in the audience today that do work for a domestic violence shelter and you are interested in becoming pet friendly, please do check out our Don't Forget the Pets program. Our website is don'tforgetthepets.org. That really is a resource tailored to help you get from point A to point Z, where Safe Voices is now. In fact, we do have a wonderful document library with sample policies, sample contracts that Safe Voices has contributed to. So you can actually see, what policies are they implementing? Did they write them down? And use those as jumping off points to get started. We also have a one-on-one coaching program if you'd like some additional support. And we also run webinars just like this one. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Red Rover, at Don't Forget the Pets, or reach out to Safe Voices if you have questions, because really we are all here to help you get started making your shelter pet inclusive. So just thank you all so much for joining us today, and a huge, huge thank you to our presenters from Safe Voices for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.